The courtroom was silent, but the silence was heavy. A powerful black billionaire woman stood trembling in front of a racist judge who smirked with cruelty. He demanded she speak the name of her rapist. Everyone expected her to break. But when she finally said his name, the entire courtroom froze. Amara Daniels, one of the richest black women in the country, never thought her wealth or status could protect her from injustice. She built her empire from nothing, owning hospitals, schools, and companies that gave hope to her community. But when she pressed charges against the man who had hurt her years ago, the system turned against her. On the day of the trial, people whispered as she walked into the courtroom. Some saw her as a hero. Others saw her as a target. And sitting high on the bench was Judge Harrison, a man known for his prejudice, his hatred toward powerful women, and most of all, his cruelty toward people of color. The trial began with a weight that pressed on every chest in the room, a tension that could be felt in the silence between words. Amara's lawyers stood tall, presenting the first pieces of evidence with clarity, but each time he spoke, Judge Harrison interrupted with a scoff or a dismissive wave of his hand. Important documents were brushed aside, key testimonies reduced to irrelevant, and each objection from the defense was granted as though the outcome had already been chosen before the trial had even started. The accused sat smugly at the defense table, his lips curled into a faint smile, his eyes daring Amara to crumble. It was clear the judge's loyalty was not to justice, but to the man whose power stretched deep into politics and business. Then, without warning, Judge Harrison leaned forward, his voice sharp as a knife, cutting through the quiet. "Mrs. Daniels," he said, stressing her name with mock respect, "you claim this man violated you, yet you expect us to believe without proof? If your story is true, then prove it. Say his name. Say it here, in front of this court." The room gasped, a ripple of shock spreading among the spectators. Forcing a survivor to speak the name of a rapist in public was not only cruel, but deeply humiliating, and everyone knew it. Amara's hands clenched at her sides, her throat tightening as the weight of the moment pressed down on her. She could feel the judge's satisfaction, the defense's mocking smirk, and the buzzing whispers of the crowd, waiting to see if she would break. For a moment, fear threatened to silence her. But beneath the fear was something else, a fire that had burned for years, demanding to be released. The courtroom seemed to shrink around Amara, the air pressing heavy against her chest as all eyes fixed on her trembling frame. For a heartbeat, she closed her eyes and thought of the nights she had carried this secret, the countless times she had wanted to scream but was forced into silence by fear of losing everything she had built. Now that silence had ended, slowly, she lifted her head, her gaze steady as it locked onto the man across the room. Her lips parted, and though her voice trembled at first, the words carried a strength that cut through the tension like steel. "His name," she said, pausing as the defense attorney shifted uncomfortably, "is Richard Hale." The reaction was immediate: gasps, murmurs, the shuffle of papers, the clattering of pens hitting the floor. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. Richard Hale, a polished and powerful politician, a man painted by the media as a champion of justice, sat frozen in his seat, his confidence cracked as his face drained of color. His eyes darted nervously to the judge, searching for protection. Judge Harrison's smirk faltered, his hand tightening around his gavel, but even he seemed unsettled. Amara's voice grew stronger as she repeated the name, each syllable striking like a hammer against the walls of lies that had protected him for years. She could feel her fear peeling away, replaced by a surge of power she had long thought lost. In that moment, she was not just speaking for herself, but for every silenced voice, every woman whose story had been buried by men like him. The courtroom had frozen, but in Amara's chest, a storm of truth had finally broken free. The silence that followed Amara's words was thick and electric, but she refused to let it swallow her. She straightened her back, her voice growing steadier as she began to unravel the truth that had haunted her for years. "Richard Hale," she continued, her eyes unflinching as they stayed locked on him, "is not the man this city believes him to be. Behind the polished smile and the speeches about justice, he is a predator. Gasps filled the room as Amara described the night he had cornered her, the threats he hissed in her ear, the power he wielded like a weapon to keep her silent. She spoke of the fear she carried, the sleepless nights, the shame that had never belonged to her but had been forced onto her shoulders. Every word was heavy, yet liberating, as if she was peeling chains off her soul. The jury leaned forward, drawn in by her bravery, while reporters scribbled furiously, their pens barely keeping up with her truth. Whispers swelled among the audience, spreading like fire through dry grass. For the first time, Richard Hale's polished mask cracked. His hands twitched, his jaw tightened, his eyes darted as though searching for escape. Judge Harrison pounded his gavel, his voice booming with demands for silence. But no one listened. The courtroom had shifted. The walls that once seemed to favor the powerful now echoed with the strength of Amara's testimony. It was no longer just a trial about one woman's pain. It had become a reckoning, a spotlight burning through years of corruption and silence. And as Amara stood there, unwavering, she knew she had finally broken the chains of fear, turning her pain into a weapon of truth. The courtroom, once a place of silence and intimidation, now pulsed with a fire that no gavel could put out. Amara's words lingered in the air like thunder, shaking the walls of power that had long protected men like Richard Hale. The jury members exchanged uneasy glances, their expressions hardening as they realized the weight of what they had just heard. One by one, survivors from the gallery began to rise, women who had carried their own scars, some with trembling hands, others with voices cracking as they whispered that Amara's story was also theirs. The truth spread like a rising tide, too powerful to be drowned by prejudice. Richard Hale sat pale and cornered, his arrogance stripped away, his once proud name now poisoned with the truth. Even Judge Harrison, who had entered the trial so certain of control, could not mask his unease as the evidence and testimonies mounted like a storm crashing through his court. When a verdict finally came, the words rang out like freedom itself, guilty on all counts. A gasp of relief swept the room, followed by the sound of hands clapping, voices cheering, hearts beating with hope. Amara closed her eyes as tears streamed down her cheeks, not from weakness, but from release, as though the weight of years had finally been lifted from her soul. She had faced a system designed to break her, and yet she had stood unbroken. As she stepped out of the courthouse, the cameras flashed and the crowd erupted into chants of her name, not just as a billionaire, but as a symbol of courage. In that moment, Amara Daniels knew her fight had become bigger than her story. She had awakened justice, and nothing could silence it again.